if I'm the HR person and I have to discipline you and the manager gets to treat you well, that causes such a dichotomy in an organization to say, well, if I want good things to happen to me, I'll go to the manager. And if I don't want good things to happen to me, I'll go to HR.
Welcome to another episode of Higher Learning with me, your host, Oz Rashid, where we are obsessed with how the best leaders identify the top talent around the world. Every Wednesday, we drop new episodes where I speak to business leaders and academics to hear their stories about finding top talent today. If you're new to the channel, great to have you here, and I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today. Today, we are joined by Todd Brody. Todd is the Chief Talent Officer for Talent at Work. Todd, how you doing?
I'm really great, Oz. Thanks for having me here today.
Yeah, I'm really excited, man. I really enjoyed our pre-call. You've got a lot of experience and global travel that I want to get into, I want to discuss with you. But I got to say, we always start by trying to understand a little bit about the career journey. So I always want to know, let's start here. How did you get into HR? Is it something that you fell into? Is it something that was an intentional thing from a young age? Help me understand how you got into HR in the first place.
So thanks, Oz. I think that as I think back to my journey to come into HR, as I think back to when I started about 25 or so years ago, the profession of HR wasn't really a thing. I was a non-HR business leader, or what I call a non-HR business leader, working for a financial institution in Canada, and kind of fell into HR. They were looking for someone that was a strong people leader at the time to do some union avoidance and labor relation training. And they tapped me on the shoulder to say, hey, Todd, would you mind doing some of that across the country to really help other leaders understand, why people choose to be organized from a unionized perspective and what they can do to help, make sure they have solid relationships between themselves and their employees directly.
Wow. So when you came in, is the view of HR, it has to have changed pretty dramatically from the beginning till now. What would you say an HR professional was kind of valued for and considered when you first got into it versus where you think it's evolved to today?
Well, I don't know if it's evolved as much as everyone hopes it's evolved. In some cases, in other cases, I think it's evolved quite a bit, Oz, quite honestly. Sure. So, at the point in time that I came into HR, there was a great focus more so on compliance. So it was very heavily compliance focused on, labor relations, employee relations, and kind of adhering to law and legislation around things like talent acquisition and total rewards. The organization I worked for is a financial institution based in Canada, and they were actually quite forward thinking. So they thought early about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and had a department in regards to that focused in on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that was kind of the refreshing piece. As I continued through my journey, HR has kind of evolved, and I say kind of because in some pockets of the world, we see kind of greatness and moving towards kind of being a strategic HR business partner and looking at kind of the tactical day-to-day aspects of HR kind of separately, especially for larger global organizations. In some organizations, there's still a predominant focus on HR being kind of the police and focusing on compliance. And I don't know that that's helpful and healthy for an organization just to focus on that.
I totally agree with you on that. I think that the beginnings of HR and why HR was maybe created and people like you were brought in the first place was there's a problem. There's an issue. Mm-hmm. There's some wrist slapping that needs to be done. There's something from a compliance perspective that's not right. I feel like a lot of business leaders almost did it as a CYA. And in my mind, there is a difference between tactical HR and a difference between strategic HR. Tactical HR is very important. Every company needs it. It's important that you do things the right way and the right regulations. Totally there, right? People don't get paid. There's got to be some place for employee relations. There's got to be something there. So that's really, really important. However, what I'm really into and what really excites me is what I would consider strategic HR. And really that falls to me under the buckets of attract, develop, and retain. And I personally believe and have spent my career justifying the business value of that role and how important that is to the bottom line. And I talk to CEOs and CFOs all the time to try to help them understand that this isn't HR from the 70s, right? This is something that should be able to propel your business forward as a strategic advantage more so than a cost center, right? So I think some of those, now I see a lot of that now, and it's definitely evolved in a very positive way. But I think sometimes those old paradigms are hard to completely shake. And so that's why you see some of the, depending on the company, depending on the leader, some different takes or some different, feelings around the importance of a great HR function in an organization. Do you agree?
I would agree with that. And I would kind of add to it. I think, for people that still struggle to understand a strategic role of HR, it's probably because they've never had that before. They don't know what good strategic HR looks like. They rely on kind of that historical definition of HR, being that police officer, or more so yet, HR having to deal with kind of all the bad things, where manager gets to deal with all the good things interacting with the employee. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, HR, you're so good at having those conversations, those difficult conversations with an employee, you go have it, which means that the manager gets to remove themselves from the responsibility of managing the complete performance of the employee. And they get to deal with kind of all those good things. It's like, wanting to be the good parent all the time and not wanting to discipline the kids. HR, unfortunately, in many cases, have become the disciplinary, department, because managers don't want to deal with that, which is kind of that historical view to a great degree, I think.
Yeah, and the thing about HR and the way I and I could talk about this stuff all day, I'm kind of a nerd about it, is that I think it's been a vertical for a very long time in terms of functions in an organization. And I've seen some organizations be really successful treating it as a horizontal, right? Having things like DEI, talent acquisition, talent management, performance management, learning and development integrated into the specific functions and business leaders, and having them have responsibility for that, but having a great strategic HR partner that helps you do it at the highest levels and understand what great looks like, and even can help you execute it from time to time. But certainly shouldn't be one of these situations where it's like, oh, this is kind of the tough stuff. I don't want to do that. HR, you go handle it, in case I mess it up. I don't think that's the right way to treat an HR person. I don't think that's the right way to treat your HR organization.
I also don't think it's right for people either, for the employees in the organization. And I think that's kind of the critical piece. If I'm the HR person and I have to discipline you, and then the manager gets to treat you well, that causes such a dichotomy in an organization, or kind of this bifurcated organization, to say, well, if I want good things to happen to me, I'll go to the manager. And if I don't want good things to happen to me, I'll go to HR, which causes employees not to take advantage of additional things that HR typically can offer in terms of help and support and guidance and advice.
Well, and what I typically find is that HR doesn't have enough bandwidth to focus on those really high areas of impact, or those areas that show real long-term gains, because they're having to handle a lot of the tactical stuff. And that's the stuff that really should be handled in the business. Because I also think there's an accountability problem there too. If you are only doing half of the process, or only the easy stuff when it comes to management, I don't think you're doing your job as a leader and as a manager. And most organizations get this right, but I've certainly seen others, to your point, that cop out and kind of outsource it to their HR team.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Absolutely.
I love that. So you spent a ton of your career in healthcare as well. You're with McKesson, one of the big medical technology firms in the world. And then you were with Centurion Health most recently, before the role with Talent at Work. How is healthcare and HR different? I mean, I just think that the ability to work with people is so unique to that industry, but also such a paramount part of a great HR organization. How is it different for you?
So I don't know that it's completely different, quite honestly. There's uniquenesses in healthcare versus non-healthcare. When you look at kind of the challenge, I think, in healthcare today, is healthcare, I think, historically has been under this belief that we're here, and kind of like the field of dreams, we've built it so people will come to us from a patient perspective, and people will come to us from a healthcare practitioner perspective. And historically that happened. And then, as time evolved, and if I look back 5 to 10 to 15 years ago, that dynamic started to change. And I don't think healthcare was proactively focused on potential changes in terms of, what patients were requiring and demanding, what legislative changes there might be, and what healthcare practitioners were potentially looking for in the future. As you look at, most organizations, people are looking for a few key things. They're looking for contributing to organizational success. They want personal success, and they want to be rewarded and recognized for that in the best way possible that's meaningful. Sometimes that's compensation. Sometimes it's non-compensation. I don't think healthcare kind of predictively focused on that. And so that's where they kind of are running behind a little bit. And when you add on to that kind of a healthcare practitioner shortage globally, that makes it so much harder to attract and retain people. I think healthcare still believes this one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to attracting and retaining people. And let's face it, that doesn't really work in any industry. And so when you add all these challenges and kind of starting kind of behind the eight ball with a healthcare focus, it just continues to be a challenge to attract and retain people, in a healthcare organization, regardless if you're a hospital setting, a broader healthcare setting, a clinic setting, whatever it is.
Yeah, our company, MSH, does a ton of work in the healthcare space. And whenever meeting with clinical leaders or chief nursing officers or just people who are, so focused in driving this great value-based care to their patients, the shortage of the clinicians and of the nurses and the ability to keep them and keep them engaged and doing their best work, it's gotten harder and harder as the years have gone by. And really, there's an epidemic there of something that fundamentally needs to change and be better, because that level of top talent delivering great care to patients is such a differentiator for your healthcare organization. And we've been lucky to work with some of those companies around helping them do that. But it's such a constant need because of the attrition you see in the space, and just mitigating it even by 2 to 3% can have a world of difference. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. I see the same synergy there you do. All right, let's take it a little bit of a different direction. You've had the opportunity to travel and work with global companies throughout your illustrious career. I'm really interested in what HR looks like in different countries and its role in different countries. Are there any stories you can share, that wouldn't happen in the U.S. that maybe are common in another country that you deal with as an HR professional and leader?
Well, so I'd say a couple of differences. So I started my HR career in Canada. So even coming into the U.S., it was a different experience between coming from Canada into the U.S. in terms of kind of what the focus was and kind of what, HR was all about. As I started my career, as I mentioned, in the financial institution in Canada, the organization was a forward-thinking organization that had kind of all these different focus areas: talent acquisition and total rewards, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and labor and employee relations, and learning and development. And when I came into the US, the first kind of initial reaction was everything was just so compliance focused. And while the US has evolved, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, to see different things, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion, and maybe be more strategic. As I look around the world, we see kind of a variation of that is probably the best way to describe it. If I think about organizations in the Middle East, they're very forward thinking in terms of technology, well beyond what you'll see in the US. But a lot of what we see kind of from a day-to-day practice perspective, it's still very compliance focused. Even as you take a look at, global forward-thinking organizations, they still struggle a little bit to say, how do I move away from kind of that historical view and move to more of that strategic view of kind of delivering good HR service? And so that's where, we see similarities and differences. I'd say in the Middle East, we're probably where the US was 10 to 15 years ago in terms of struggling to say, here's what a strategic HR practitioner looks like and means and feels like, and how it can help the organization. As I look at other places around the world, in parts of Europe and parts of, South Africa and parts of Japan, they're very forward thinking because they've also looked at technology and said we can remove some of the day-to-day tactical activities, and that allows us to focus more strategically.
I love that. And so I want to really drill down into the Middle East, because I know your role at TalentWorks, you've been to Dubai over 40 times. At this point, I feel like I'm going to get a call from Dubai, because I've had so many guests come on that have spent time there, and I sound like the Chamber of Commerce to Dubai, but great place to do business. And to your point, super innovative from a technology perspective.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, I'm going to go a little bit of a different direction here.
Sure.
I'm interested in the first time you went.
Yeah.
Right. Walk us through what it was like for you when you were there. Did it take time to adapt? Did you read the manual on what to do and not to do in Dubai? Help me understand that process.
Oh, yeah. I'm smiling and laughing because the first time I went to Dubai was probably, just as I think back, 10 to 12 years ago now at this point in time. And it was very, I'll call it traditional from a cultural perspective, where there was the list of do's and don'ts. It was do's and don'ts such as men not interacting with women, in a closed environment, closed room. I also traveled to Saudi Arabia kind of around the same time. So some of the same restrictions were put in place. And I was doing some training for HR professionals kind of at that point in time, around 10 to 12 years ago. Dubai has evolved so greatly that it's changed, but it's maintained its cultural relevance and cultural focus. And a lot of that's attributed to, their sheikh, their ruler of Dubai, he was very forward thinking. And there's a great book that he actually authored. It's called The Sheikh CEO. I actually have it in front of me because I refer to it quite often. It's called The Sheikh CEO Lessons in Leadership. And kind of one of the quotes, because I wanted to be able to share this with your listeners today, that really kind of takes me to kind of where Dubai has come from, is that the sheikh historically is known as a risk taker. Actually, he refers to himself as a risk taker extraordinaire. And his philosophy is that doing things 70% is good today is a million times better than aiming for 80% tomorrow, and infinitely better than 100% in a year from now. And as you think about kind of Dubai's focus and history over the last 50 years, they had planned to be relevant on the global stage, and they've achieved that. As I think back to probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I happened to go out to Dubai to celebrate a friend's 40th birthday, and was quite shocked and surprised at the nightclub life in Dubai. Excuse me. And just local people kind of being in nightclubs and kind of the attire that they were wearing. When I think back 10 or 12 years ago, it was very traditional dress and very traditionally kind of focused. You know, alcohol was restricted to only certain locations, you know, in Dubai. And that's significantly changed. You would think you were in New York in many places.
So Todd, I got to ask you, like, everything like a club in Miami, or like, are there any like limitations? Like the women are dressed a certain way, their drinks are flowing, they got the VIP section. I'm sure.
I'm going to say like South Beach, or pretty close to South Beach. Maybe not as risque all the time, but you do see some questionable outfits in Dubai at this point in time. So yeah.
I mean this respectfully. I don't know anybody logged into this podcast and thought they were going to get club advice in Dubai from Todd Brody. But here we are. You love to see it. That's amazing. And that's good information for me, because I spent very little time there. I was there for about 24 hours on a layover once. Beautiful city. Saw the Burj Khalifa. Had a great meal. Didn't really get into the business aspect of it, but there was a part of me that was a little bit worried, like, hey, you know, the do's and don'ts, and I don't want to overstep my bounds, and I don't want to, consecrate or get anybody upset with any religious beliefs or anything like that. So it's nice to see that it's evolved like that, and that maybe that you can go there and not only work hard, but you can also enjoy yourself out there too.
You can, and there's still respect for the culture. I mean, that's a given, and that's expected. Interestingly enough, and I don't know as if you're aware of this or not, but in 2025, the first casino location will open in one of the Emirates. I believe it's actually opening in Sharjah, and then by 2026, there will be a casino in Dubai. Yeah.
I mean, they're just going to be printing money hand over fist. I mean, you bring some of the wealthiest people together in the world, take a little risk. We have the sheikh saying he's the risk taker extraordinaire. Why not have a casino? That seems like a natural next step. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to bring even more money into that area. And I've been looking a lot recently at some of the different, tax breaks and like things they offer small businesses and businesses out there. They're doing a really good job of getting people to migrate from Europe and Asia and come there. And that's one of the reasons why they're growing as such a global entity on the business stage.
Absolutely. And so a couple of neighboring countries, Saudi Arabia, for example, also has taken notice of this. And when you look at kind of what Saudi calls Vision 2030, they are looking to diversify kind of their approach to kind of how they generate wealth and revenue for the country, which has historically been focused on oil. But tourism is such a big thing that Saudi is focusing in on. They're actually opening a theme park, and I think the theme park opens in 2025, if I'm not mistaken. Excuse me. And then they actually just allowed alcohol in the kingdom for diplomats only. And I think that just started this past year, if I'm not mistaken. So they're recognizing kind of the need for not only just a focus on work, but work-life balance. And again, maintaining that cultural respect or religious respect, but understanding that in order to maintain relevance in a global community, you have to do things to continue to attract people into your country.
Taking the best from the Eastern cultures and a little bit from the Western cultures and mixing them together can lead to a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Love it. Amazed to see the growth, astounded by it. And I appreciate you giving us some of those insights there. One of the things that you do at your current company is really focused on employee experience. And I think you mentioned to me that there is a difference between employee experience and employee engagement. I don't know that I necessarily differentiated between the two. I thought that a good experience leads to good engagement. What do you see the difference as, and why is employee experience so important in your mind?
So from an employee experience standpoint, engagement is really connecting the employee to the organization and hoping that they'll give kind of more than that 100 and 110%, whatever it is. But the experience really is what drives the engagement. And historically, organizations have more focused on just that relationship, predominantly the relationship between the employee and the manager. When you think about employee experience more broadly, it's kind of like an extension, or I shouldn't say kind of like, it is an extension of customer experience. So how do you attract and retain customers to the organization? You have to have a good product. They have to be able to connect well with you through some type of technology solution, and they have to have a positive interaction with employees in the organization. The same holds true when you think about employee experience. Employees are looking for a sense of community. They're wanting to make sure things like their physical workspace are conducive to them giving their best and contributing kind of their greatest. They want to make sure that they have the right, what I'll call, environment. It could be something such as ambient lighting and making sure that they're being taken well care of, but even making sure that, they have access to all the right things that make them feel comfortable in a workplace. Then you kind of have to add on to that kind of the digital capabilities is what I'll call them. If they're continuing losing internet connection, or they have to ask permission to print something on a printer, or whatever that technology capability is, they're going to be disheartened and think, you know what, you're impeding me from continuing to do my work. So unless you're focusing on all those 4 pillars and making sure that the right balance is there for each employee, because employee experience, well, you can look at it macroly from those 4 pillars. You also have to look at it microly for each individual employee to say, what are we giving you that you need, and what are we not giving you that you're needing, kind of from these 4 pillars. When you look at, kind of age demographics in an organization as well, different age demographics will also require different things from those 4 pillars. So you also have to offer the flexibility to make sure that you're able to offer all those things to employees as well.
Is there a company you think of in your career that just really crushed it from an employee experience perspective, or maybe one that you've worked with in your current role?
I don't know if anyone's crushed it. I will tell you that. I think people are working really hard. And the one that comes to my mind actually is Adobe. So I had a chance a number of years ago to take a group of HR executives on tours of different organizations in Silicon Valley. And Adobe was really focused on the employee experience. In fact, their HR function, if I remember correctly, oversees kind of the real estate piece for their employees as well. So where we're working is as equally important as how and what skill set and capabilities we're bringing to the organization to drive this employee experience. I think many organizations are still confusing engagement and experience. So while they're focusing on kind of the fun things to do, perhaps the pizza parties, the treating people well, all those kind of things, and calling that employee experience, I truly don't think they're nailing it. Yeah.
That's great. I love that. Shout out to Adobe. Great company, doing a lot of really cool things. Acquired Figma, I think, pretty recently, which is a tool we're using all the time for our software company. That's awesome. I appreciate that insight. Let's talk about hiring, because that's what pays the bills here.
Sure.
Aside of our few sponsorships that we're working on, we'll see about that. I want to know from somebody that has been involved in, I would imagine, hundreds, if not thousands of hires. I'd like to learn a little bit what makes what you see, what you've done differently. So let me ask you, let's start here. Do you have a core hiring philosophy, something that when you're bringing somebody onto your team or into your organization that you stick to or you adhere to?
Yeah. So I would say, as I think about this, I want to make sure that someone is comfortable to be kind of their authentic selves. And what does that really mean? That they're comfortable with contributing to their ideas day one. They're comfortable with asking questions. They're comfortable with kind of challenging the way things have been done since day one, or since they start. And I think that really starts off with kind of a conversation and discussion. As I think about kind of how I interview, well, there's some things I want to know technically. I start off with a conversation. I want to make sure that people can build a relationship with me as their leader, and they can build relationships with others on the team. as I think about kind of bringing people into my teams and the organization I've worked with, fit for me is so critical. I can always teach HR technical skills. That's not a problem. Everyone that's in HR has learned HR technical skills, so it can happen. But that general ability to relate not only to people, but relate to a business understanding is also important for me as well.
I really like that. And that fit aspect you brought up is what's really important. You can be a great employee maybe at one company, but that doesn't mean the fit at the next company or the next role is always going to be. So in fact, it almost never is. And so it's always about that fit and that understanding of that fit. You know what I just realized? I got the Burj Khalifa right here.
Do you?
I got that right up there. I didn't even realize that. See,
well,
I did it just for you.
Behind me, I have it sort of the skyline of Dubai in Lego. Yeah.
I love that.
Right
okay, you win.
My
you
Notre
win.
Dame Lego right there. So there you go.
I love that. Well, I see the Notre Dame Lego. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What about memorable interview experiences? When I ask you that, does one come to mind?
A good one or a not so good one?
I'll tell you. The listeners love the bad ones, but either one will work.
So I think it's just what I was suggesting. Probably the best interviews I've had have been really a conversation. People can look at a resume and understand what your skills are, and sure, there might be some need to validate those skills in some way, shape, or form. But just having a conversation, to talk a little bit about what interests and desires are, why you want to come and work for the organization, how you think you're going to contribute to organizational success. If people can truly articulate that, that's meaningful. And that's what I found the most meaningful from an interview perspective, or I'll call it a conversation or discussion perspective.
I love that. Now, I know you've been in some really, really bad interviews. You took the HR political answer there.
Yeah.
I respect it.
So now I'll tell you the bad one if you want. No.
So give me a bad one. Let's hear a bad one.
So it's funny. So, I've been in HR for about 25 years, and I think I've had, some great success in terms of the roles I've had. And, more recently, as I kind of look for my next opportunity, because the current one I have is more of an interim contracted role, which will end at some point in time. But, as I look at kind of a few of the interviews I've had recently with individuals who kind of hold out the shingle of executive recruiter, some of the questions that people ask, somewhat at a more senior level, like just recently I was asked, so, tell me about a time when you were very successful at, solving a customer issue. And I kind of went, how is this even relevant to a senior executive job that we're supposed to be talking about? And then the recruiter followed up with, so where do you see yourself in 2 to 3 years from now? And I went, I didn't even know how to respond.
Could you see the chat GPT in their glasses reflection? Well, I'm like, these are like out of the box questions over here. Huh?
And so I was just thinking to myself, okay, so people that are holding this title of executive recruiter, I think have kind of fallen into it. And unfortunately, they haven't had the opportunity to be mentored or coached to say, here's how you differentiate a senior level experience from maybe a mid-level practitioner experience from a entry-level practitioner experience or employee experience, right? And so, well, all the questions were probably valid and good questions, just not for someone with experience in HR of 20 years holding senior level roles. Right. And so that's where that's what I find more so recently, that I see a lot more of that, actually.
It's tough to teach self-awareness. I mean, don't get me started on executive search. That to me, the way that's been done for many, many years is a relic of the past. I believe there's a new and better way to do it going forward. But you get some of this old traditional boilerplate stuff that it just doesn't provide enough value. And so I'm totally with you on that. And I appreciate you calling that out.
I think a second one, that just comes to my mind in kind of some of the recent experiences is individuals don't see or understand what transferable skills are, right? And it's unfortunate. So if I say, okay, something is beige, but the organization is saying, well, we call it oatmeal here because we want to be unique. The recruiter is only looking for that word of oatmeal, either in a resume, a CV, or the interview process. And if you don't use that word oatmeal, you're getting disqualified. And that's a true challenge, I think, not only for myself, probably as a candidate, perhaps, but I think for candidates in general.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I also think that, judging everything, I always say the resume is 10% of the story, if that. And that context, that nuance is so important. And what you have is, it goes back to what we were talking about being truly contextually and business relevant. right? When you know those things and you can understand the transferable skills, you can understand this means X or this means Y. Now you're really, and that's how we train and how we hire people here. But I know for a fact that a lot of times people are buzzword matching. They're just trying to get through their standard questionnaire. It's just, you're doing the tactic, you're not doing the job. And I think that's a real disservice, especially to people as accomplished as yourself and people that know what great looks like in this space.
Yeah. I think, one of the other differentiators truly is recruiters really just, or talent acquisition people maybe more broadly in general, being more of that order taker. And that's where you really get this bad experience from. In my view, a talent acquisition professional is really a strategic partner, like an HR strategic partner or an employee relations strategic partner, and really there to coach and counsel and guide and advise and push back when necessary. And again, I can't tell you how many talent acquisition people I've talked to, when I ask them about specific experience or talk about transferable skills, they'll say, oh, the hiring manager won't go for that. What's been your role as the talent acquisition person to help convince the hiring manager this is the direction that you should be going in, because you're losing out on great, awesome quality candidates?
Yeah, and it's very few and far between. And quite frankly, it's just an easy way to stand out if you do know how to do those things. And so, I mean, I'm not going to complain too much about it, but I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
What about a favorite question? Do you have a favorite question you like to ask in interviews?
Do I have a favorite question? Let me think about that. I truly just want them to be able to describe kind of how they're going to contribute to the organization's success, both tactically and strategically. And for me, kind of that differentiated answer is the ability to look at both things. If they just talk about kind of day-to-day activities, that tells me that they may not understand how their work connects to organizational success, along with kind of their personal or individual success, or if they're leading a small team. And people have to be able to articulate that, in my view, regardless of what role you are. If you're a frontline employee and you're very task focused, you need to know how you're helping the organization be successful. And you have to be able to articulate that. So if I'm producing widgets each and every day, I need to understand that all those widgets help the organization sell more, produce more, satisfy a customer more, and it translates to some type of performance measure or metric, be it profitability or customer experience or efficiency metrics.
That makes a lot of sense. I like that. What about there's a lot, the market is really saturated right now. There's a lot of great talent available. Mm-hmm. If they're listening, right, and they want some ideas of some standard things you can do to stand out in an interview, or be someone that ultimately gets hired, what would your recommendation be to somebody like that?
So I think a couple of things. I think that, the old adage of apply and I'm going to get, looked at is out the window. They have to be able to work and try and find who that hiring manager is, or at least someone in the organization, and make that connection and not be afraid to do that. In one of my early jobs, I used to be a vendor selling peanuts and popcorn in a sports stadium in Western Canada. And I'll never forget the orientation that I went to, excuse me, and the quote stuck in my mind saying, "Shrinking violets don't sell," right? You can't be that shrinking violet today, because no one's going to look at you if you're that shrinking violet. You have to continue to not only get your name out in different forms or fashions, but you also have to be able to speak about current events, current things that are happening, and show some type of relevance as to why an organization should look to you.
What about, if I asked you about the best hire you ever made, does anybody come to mind?
The best hire I've ever made. I don't think it's just been one. I could probably point to about 3 or 4 people.
That's why we came to you. Yeah. That's why you're the expert.
And so I think it's a couple of things. 2 of them had very limited to no HR experience. And, I think it's important to look at the person as a whole and what their potential and capability is. That's also, I think, something that I would come back to answer or add to an earlier question. You asked me, what's my hiring philosophy, is look at potential. And so they've gone on to great success. One has actually been, I think he's now a senior VP for, I just want to remember the name of the company. I think it's one of the movie theaters in Canada. I can't remember if it's Regal or whatever the brand is, but he's now a senior VP of HR for the theater company or the theater group. Another one actually went on to be I believe the title was VP or something like that for Starbucks Canada. So she was one of my early hires. And then there's been two more recently in the US that have gone on to great success, all of which, are probably comparable, or I would consider them peers now at this point in time. One of them I still kind of mentor every once in a while. She'll give me a call and she'll check in with me just to kind of say, hey, what do you think about this or that or the next thing? And I think I would say those are my successes. I think probably part of the success was that, I hire for fit, as I mentioned, but I want to make sure I give people development opportunities that will stretch their skill and ability, but also acting as that resource to say, if you need some help, I'm going to be here for you, and be able to demonstrate that.
I like that. What about the other end of the spectrum, though? Because we all mess up. We all make wrong hires. Can you look back on a theme when you've missed on a hire? Is there something that maybe you realized you did wrong after the fact?
Yeah. Excuse me. I think that, one of the things that sometimes happens with hiring managers is you don't sometimes pause and you kind of hire out of desperation. And so I've made probably, I'm going to say over the course of my career, half a dozen desperation hires that didn't turn out well. It ended up in, separation from the company. And so I think when you kind of say to yourself, oh my God, I need someone now, what I've learned to do now is kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, so what's the worst thing that can happen if I wait another week or 2 weeks or a month before I actually bring someone into the organization so I can find the right person? And I kind of realized that probably maybe not quite 10 or so years ago. And I think that's completely changed the dynamic, because truly, what's the worst thing that can happen if there's no HR person there? I might have to answer some questions myself, or, people will make choices and decisions. Hiring managers will make some good choices or maybe not some good choices without HR guidance and advice. And then you fix it at that point in time if necessary.
There's software that can help with that too. So I've heard.
There you go.
We'll follow up on that later. What about, all right, let's take this a little bit of a different direction. I know we talked about The Chic CEO. You recommended that as a book. Yeah. Is there anything else content-wise you've seen or book you've read recently you want to recommend?
So there's another one. I keep these two on my desk all the time. I've probably read them about 5 or 6 times. Excuse me. There's another one called One from Many, and it's about Visa, the rise of what they call a chaotic organization by D. Hawk. And so that's my other one. And it really talks a lot about some lessons on leadership. So how you give kind of guidance and advice, and how you help people grow from that guidance and advice. You're not necessarily going to show them, but you're really going to ask some key questions to help people build that critical thinking skill so that they can ultimately solve problems on their own.
Ooh, I like that. One from Many?
One from Many.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
It's an older book. I think it's still probably published. I have my dog-eared copy next to me here, but yeah.
I love that. All right, last question, Todd. I want to know, if you could give your 20-year-old self some advice that you didn't know then, but that you know now, what would that advice be?
I think that's such a hard one for me, Oz, because I've always been of the belief, take a risk, it's going to turn out. And so in the course of my life, I've moved probably about 17 or 18 times all throughout North America, all to do something cool and different. Even when I started working for myself for a period of time, I thought, is this really the right thing to do? It was kind of the 2005, 2006, 2007, when there was kind of a near financial collapse. And I thought, is this the right thing to do? And it's proven to be successful. So if there was one piece of advice I would give myself, is probably trust that gut instinct and trust that that things are going to turn out well. They might not be perfect, but they're going to turn out well.
I think by definition, the paths we choose, as long as we're intentional about them and fight through adversity, ultimately it's going to end up working out, because that's the way the world is. And even if it doesn't, we rationalize to ourselves why this was the right thing to happen. Mm-hmm. So I do think taking those risks, taking your lumps and figuring it out as you go, many times lead to the best outcomes. I certainly took a circuitous route to get to where I'm at. I certainly, if you would have asked me when I was 20 years old, what would I be doing at 42? I don't think being on a podcast with Todd Brody would have been the answer.
I wouldn't have thought being on a podcast with Oz either would have been an answer for me 30 years ago, but
Here we are. Here we are, where we're discussing Dubai nightlife and the Calgary Stampede and just having a grand old time.
There you go.
Todd, listen, I really appreciate you coming on. I think this is going to be an amazing episode. Our listeners are going to love it. For those listening, please smash subscribe, give us a rating. It really helps the pod. Appreciate you coming on, Todd. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Oz.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
Thanks.
Bye.
Right now.